Hello everyone, I am Ashley Banfield.
And I am coming to you once again from the shores of the Bahamas, specifically the beautiful Abaco Islands.
More precisely, Elbow Cay. I am reporting directly from the Hopetown Inn and Marina. And I keep mentioning them, even though they are not sponsoring this.
Just to be clear, I want you to understand that since this inn is located on an active marina, you might hear people dining nearby.
Let me show you. It might be hard to catch, but the restaurant is right over there. Really beautiful. Beautiful. Take a look at that candy-striped lighthouse. I mentioned it in a previous episode.
I believe it is one of the few,
Or perhaps the only active lighthouse left that still runs on kerosene and must be hand-cranked. I think that is amazing, and I wanted to share the view because it is absolutely stunning.
It is quite famous here. It is a major local attraction, so you will hear crowds eating, and occasionally the ferry will pull up to dock right behind me.
You might catch a glimpse of that as well. Today, I have crucial updates on the case of Lynette Hooker. She has vanished. Now, I hesitate to use the term presumed dead, but searchers are deploying cadaver dogs, meaning authorities are treating this as a recovery effort.
Brian and Lynette Hooker had spent a carefree afternoon drinking and relaxing ashore, away from their anchored sailboat.
Using a small dinghy to travel between the boat and the beach, but she never returned.
And according to his story, he failed to reach the vessel too. He claims she fell overboard, and he drifted 4 miles, finally washing ashore around 4 in the morning.
Parts of his account might seem plausible, but there are far too many details that simply do not add up. Today, I will introduce you to the person who spent the most time with Brian Hooker. More than almost
Anyone else on that fateful day.
Brian and Lynette Hooker had headed to the Abaco Inn on Elbow Cay for some drinks.
They arrived around 4:30 in the afternoon on Saturday, April 4th, right before Easter Sunday.
Speak of the devil, there goes that ferry I was talking about.
The couple drank together for roughly 2 hours, from 4:30 until about 6:30, maybe 6:45, but definitely no later.
Brian claimed they did not leave until around 7 or 7:30.
But they left much earlier. The timestamp on the photo I shared yesterday proves they were lounging by the pool at 6:34. That photo was sent by Joe, a local fisherman who reeled in a massive wahoo and shared his snapshot with me. He originally took it for his mother to show off the gorgeous ocean scenery, completely unaware he had captured Brian and Lynette Hooker. This may be the absolute last picture of her alive.
That was taken at 6:34 p.m. on Saturday, April 4th.
Moments later, they appear on security camera footage at roughly 6:38. I have not personally reviewed the footage, but Lynette's daughter and her boyfriend,
Steve,
watched the tape, and they confirmed the timestamp shows them departing at that exact moment.
It feels incredibly suspicious.
But I digress. I want to share the details of what Brian told the fire and rescue team, who eventually recovered him from the shore between 4 and 5 in the morning, closer to 5:30. Then they drove him around, trying to locate his missing wife and get back to his vessel, and so on. He shared quite a few details before he completely clammed up and stopped talking. When the investigators finally sat him down, they threw 94 questions his way. Want to guess how many he actually answered? Just 4. He answered 4 times, then suddenly shut down and lawyered up. Now, you always have the right to remain silent, and you absolutely should. I truly believe that silence is meant to protect the innocent, to be honest. Anything you say can be twisted and turned against you, so self-preservation is key. But he went completely silent.
I want you to see the party happening in the background so you know what that noise is.
I do not want any FOMO. Either way, he refused to answer more than those 4 questions. But he certainly sang a different tune earlier on that rescue boat. I snapped these photos with Lindsay when we made our way across. We hopped on that small ferry that just pulled out,
crossing over to the far side.
Here is the marina, and Hopetown lies on the opposite bank, where the local rescue boat is usually docked. That is the exact vessel the team deployed that morning to search for Lynette and pull Brian from his isolation. Shall we say, stranded position on the Marsh Harbor shoreline.
Now, listen closely. You need to understand that Jim Todd is an absolute legend around here.
He serves as a volunteer rescue worker, and he is just a deeply respected, solid citizen.
That is not just my personal impression of him. Everyone in town says the same thing.
It is a tight-knit island, and absolutely everyone knows everyone else. But this man is genuinely good, leaping straight into action the second the call came. Deep in the early morning hours for this crisis.
But also standing right out on the bow of that search vessel next to Brian Hooker as they crossed the water to pinpoint where she allegedly fell in.
Climb on board. Let us take the 10-minute journey across the Sea of Abaco and show us where she went over.
But the accounts Brian shared with Jim Todd on the bow of that emergency vessel, well, they do not match the stories he told his buddies on those recorded phone calls. In every version, whether he was speaking on the phone to his stepdaughter,
Lynette's own dar,
Carly Islesworth, or chatting with his friends on tape, the narratives keep changing.
This is why I respect how Jim Todd from the rescue squad positioned himself right on the bow beside Brian. The police were lingering, safely behind him, but Jim knew he had to get those questions answered immediately,
before the suspect gets an attorney and goes completely silent forever.
So he began pressing him for crucial details,
demanding to know the exact coordinates of where the vessel supposedly capsized. Did she fall over there or over there? He was literally pointing toward dry land.
Did the incident happen right around here?
Jim managed to extract that it supposedly happened around 150 yards from shore. That water is incredibly shallow, only about 6 feet deep, while their sailboat was anchored 1,000 yards away.
It was the Soulmate, a 46-foot ketch they had been living on.
But they took the dinghy to the Abaco Inn, looking forward to lunch and drinks by the pool.
And so, Jim asked the critical questions up on the bow. Interestingly, the answers he received didn't match what his friends were told.
He was also assessing the man's demeanor, trying to gauge what kind of person he really was.
How was he acting just hours after washing ashore, a mere 12 hours after his wife vanished into the sea?
In waters known to be home to sharks.
Not teeming with them, but they are there.
This is where we find a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Now, I interviewed Jim before these critical new details came to light.
Elements like an altered timeline, such as a photograph showing Lynette and Brian together at the pool at 6:34, and surveillance camera footage that Lynette's daughter reviewed, which shows them walking out of the Abaco Inn around 6:38 p.m.
We still do not know if they made it to the dock, boarded the boat, and set sail. But we do know they were walking toward that dock around 6:38 p.m. That is at least a full hour before the time Brian claims they left the establishment,
claiming it was so close to dusk when she fell overboard
that the sudden darkness prevented him from seeing her.
Right. If you suddenly have an extra hour and 20 minutes of daylight, it completely unravels his entire story.
But that's not all.
Evidence revealed that Lynette was actually wearing a green swimsuit cover-up. Yet he never mentioned this detail to Jim while talking on the bow.
He claimed she only wore a two-piece black swimsuit, completely omitting any mention of the green cover-up to anyone on the island. And that revelation deeply altered Jim's perspective on Brian's entire narrative.
What you are about to watch is my initial interview with Jim Todd before he learned these facts.
Immediately following that, you will see how his opinion of Brian Hooker shifted once he was presented with the conflicting evidence that directly challenged what he was told on the vessel.
Specifically, the timeline and the green cover-up. I should note that Jim Todd was deeply frustrated that this crucial detail about the green cover-up had been withheld, because that drastically changes how search and rescue teams operate.
what they are hunting for,
who they are tracking, and the urgent alerts sent out to volunteers.
It alters the entire operation. To him, it looks like deliberate misdirection by Brian.
But make sure to listen closely to the end of Jim's interview, because he drops a few additional pieces of information that are
Absolutely critical, and they cast a massive shadow of doubt over Brian Hooker's entire narrative.
Let's turn now to my sit-down conversation with Jim Todd.
He serves as a volunteer with the Hopetown Volunteer Fire and Rescue Service.
Walk me through that first distress call you received on Easter Sunday, April 5th.
Well, just after 5 in the morning, a call came through to my home on our rescue network about an emergency, a missing woman.
So I immediately headed down to our boat.
I met up with 3 other crew members.
And coordinating with the police via calls and voice messages, we established a starting point for our search.
Then, we cleared Hopetown Harbor and steamed down to the passage between Elbow Cay and Lubber's Quarters.
We combed through the northeastern coastline of Lubber's Quarters, and then, calculating the wind direction,
We pushed just slightly to the north,
Following where the wind led toward Great Abaco Island, right near the waters of Marsh Harbor.
we knew the local police had gathered at the Calcutta boatyard in Marsh Harbor.
so
We docked our search vessel on the mainland and headed south.
we cruised past Calcutta, right where officers were combing the shoreline.
Exactly where that dinghy sat.
On that first run, it was simply too dark to spot the dinghy.
No, wait, let me correct that. We actually did spot the dinghy. We noticed Mr. Hooker alongside another man, who we later learned was a police officer.
They were right there by the dinghy.
Then we headed back to Calcutta, where more police arrived to meet Brian Hooker. So this was at about 5:30 in the morning. If I remember right, our search started before 5:45. It was probably still before 6 o'clock when we pulled into Calcutta for the very first time. And so, after wrapping up this first search, you brought Brian Hooker onto your boat.
Right. Once we finished that first sweep, we pulled into the boatyard. That is when several officers, along with Brian Hooker,
Departed the boatyard, heading for his vessel anchored near Elbow Cay. So now you are crossing the Sea of Abaco with him on board. What was your immediate impression of him as he boarded your rescue boat?
I was actually the one who helped him step off the dock and onto our boat.
so we had a very quick exchange.
To me, he looked, I should say, as though he had been hit by a truck, just completely in shock. I thought, well, he has been awake for over 24 hours.
So his exhaustion made total sense.
Knowing what a terrible night he had. Those were the only details you had to go on.
Yeah, hit by a truck was the phrase that came to mind.
Did you manage to speak with him at all?
While making the crossing from Marsh Harbor back to Elbow Cay.
The officers were right there.
So those of us on the rescue crew wanted to give them space and let the officers do their job. After crossing the Sea of Abaco, you are back at Elbow Cay. Did you head straight for the yacht anchored out there?
Or rather, where it was anchored.
They had dropped anchor. The soulmate was sitting just off Aunt Pat's.
And is that where you brought him?
Yes, right around that area near Aunt Pat's.
We secured our rescue boat right alongside their vessel, and Brian and a police officer boarded her, staying there for about an hour. So, the rest of your rescue crew and a couple of officers remained on your boat, which was tied up directly alongside the soulmate. Tethered to the soulmate, an investigator and Brian climbed onto the deck.
Yes, did they remain outside in the cockpit, or did they go down into the cabin?
They went below. How long were they down there?
It is hard to estimate, but I would say about an hour, maybe an hour below.
Understood. And when they finally came back up, what happened next?
They were talking, but I could not hear the words. Both of them eventually stepped back onto our fire and rescue boat. And as we untied and drifted away from the vessel, one of the police officers took photos of the sailboat from a full 360 degrees. Was that done under the direct orders of the lead investigator?
Yeah, I cannot.
I do not recall his exact words, but there was some interaction there.
Get detailed photos of the whole vessel is what the senior officer appeared to command.
So your rescue boat made a full 360-degree circle around the soulmate, photographing every square inch of Brian and Lynette's yacht.
Yes.
Where did you head after that? I was not part of their conversation, so I cannot say why.
But we headed straight toward the area where we believed the missing woman had gone overboard.
So we began patrolling that coordinate.
Brian Hooker was standing out on the bow, and I took the initiative to go out and speak with him, trying to pinpoint exactly where he thought it had happened.
How long did you stay out there on the bow of the rescue boat?
With Brian, while you both try to establish the precise spot where he says she went over?
I would estimate it was easily about 10 minutes.
Just talking, trying to figure out if she fell here and how close that was to shore.
Would she have tried to swim in that direction or toward this shoreline instead?
It was that sort of discussion.
So, essentially, you are trying to pinpoint where she went over, relative to the shoreline and the yacht itself. I was focused on the practical side of things, simply figuring where to search. The location of the sailboat did not really matter to me right then. I was only thinking about where she might be if she fell here, so close to the coast, which beach she might have reached, and where our search teams should be deployed.
Did you manage to clarify that?
No. When I tried to pin down a more specific area, pointing at a certain stretch of shore, asking if it was there or further down.
Could she be behind us?
Brian said something along the lines of, "I cannot."
I am just not sure. It is all so confusing.
Those might not be his exact words, but his body language and tone conveyed that same message. I just cannot be sure. It is all incredibly confusing.
Based on what Brian told his friends and the authorities, it appears that he and Lynette departed the Abaco Inn and headed through the channel, turning left to sail south toward where the soulmate was anchored. Did he specify exactly how close he was to the channel?
When this incident supposedly took place?
Yes, he told me that when they reached the outer limit of that channel,
they made a left turn at the last piling.
They did not venture out as far as the outer channel buoy.
For larger, deeper vessels,
they draw more draft and require deeper water.
Right. So he claimed he turned south near that final marker, and I assumed he meant to the west of it.
How far out of the Abaco Channel did he claim he was when he turned left?
How far had they traveled before she supposedly went into the water?
He did not give me a specific distance in yards or feet.
But while standing on the bow of the search vessel,
and I pointed at a patch of water and asked, "Do you think it was right there?" I would estimate it was roughly 50 yards south of that last piling in the channel.
Extremely close to it, yes. Indeed, far closer to the channel than to the actual sailboat.
Did he ever suggest she might have drifted out into the open channel?
He never stated anything like that directly.
During our conversation, I asked, could it have occurred far enough to the east that she could have swum south along the inside of this small peninsula?
And once more, he shook his head with a more definite no.
But then, as was typical at that point, he said, "It is just very confusing."
I cannot be certain. Did he ever mention that the last moment he saw Lynette, she was actively swimming toward the yacht, soulmate? He never told me that, but he did claim the last time he saw her, she was swimming directly away from him. To be honest, as I recall,
she was heading toward the land, but I could not argue if he claimed it was the sailboat.
So by then, you had pinpointed roughly where Lynette supposedly fell into the water. Was that roughly 200 yards from shore? No, I think it was closer. Perhaps between 100 and 150 yards. Maybe just 100.
Not 200. That would be a stretch. It is close, but how far off was the soulmate?
The actual yacht. Much further away. Visibly much further. I have been told it was around 1,000 yards. Yes, it could easily be that distance. Exactly. I would agree with that estimate.
It is in that area. If I am overboard in choppy water, I am swimming 150 yards before attempting 1,000. Frankly, if someone tried to tell me that she was choosing between the boat and the shoreline, I would tell them they are wrong. She would not swim for that yacht. She would head straight for shore. The vessel was simply too distant, and dry land was right there. So, by this stage, you had pinned down the location of this alleged dinghy incident.
He could not give any clear details about where she was actually swimming.
He definitely never told you the last time I saw her, she was swimming back to the sailboat. I have heard people claim that. I do not remember him ever saying that to me. Did he say anything else during those 10 minutes you spent together on the bow of the search and rescue boat?
He said, no, it was all pretty much along the lines of what we just discussed, I believe.
Very matter of fact.
But he could not really pinpoint the spot. Did he claim he was drunk the night before, explaining his memory lapses?
He never mentioned any drinking. No, there was absolutely no mention of alcohol at all. Did he explain why he was unable to pinpoint the precise location where it all happened?
Because at 7:30, I have been out there, and it is still quite bright.
It is still daylight, and the sun has not even set yet. You still have about half an hour before total darkness, making it incredibly hard to spot anyone, right?
He offered no real explanation as to why his visibility was so poor.
He gave no details other than how they got separated. Personally, I think the heavy wind and the creeping darkness. If their timeline was off, say it was closer to 8 o'clock instead of 7:30, then yes, it would be pitch black. But I really did not expect that. I was not on the water, so I cannot say. However,
I would not expect a person falling overboard to drift away from the dinghy quite that fast.
But it is possible. There are many elements in his story that are definitely possible. Highly plausible, even if they are not the most likely explanation. And because of that, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. In this specific scenario, assuming Lynette was driving like Brian claims she was,
what is your theory on what would actually happen?
If you fell overboard while holding your hand directly on the steering tiller. On the throttle? Well, I have actually witnessed this happen under very different circumstances before. But if a person is sitting on the starboard side of the boat, controlling the tiller motor with their left hand, and that is a massive assumption, since I do not know the exact details. But if they were in that position, and someone suddenly lost their balance and got knocked overboard, the most probable reaction would be to cling to that motor for a brief moment as they tumbled over the starboard side of the vessel. And the precise angle of the wind and direction means that the vessel would have veered directly into the wind as she fell over the side. And as I thought about it, I realized that dinghy with its tiny electric loader, although I cannot be certain of its exact size, would likely have ground to a halt incredibly fast. And it would have veered into the wind because dragging that tiller would force it to, you know? If it veered toward her, the boat would swing to the port side and head upwind.
And in that scenario, if someone was in the water, the dinghy would end up upwind.
It is hard to say, but assuming my theory is correct, the wind would blow the dinghy back toward her. But if she sat on the opposite side instead, then my explanation would actually work against her. So, I honestly don't know. It is tough to tell. We were not there, after all.
Her daughter insists she never drove and that Brian was always at the tiller.
But I have seen a photo of her on the right pontoon, looking very much like she is driving the vessel. She has her hand placed on both the throttle and the tiller. One detail I noticed, though, is that the electric key lacks any kind of wrist strap. It is just a long string. Yet Brian claims she went over the side with it.
So, what are the odds of that happening?
How realistic is it that your hand is on the tiller driving the boat, as Brian claims, and you suddenly get tossed overboard? You release your hold on the tiller and somehow catch the string hanging loose from the ignition key. I would say the likelihood of what you just described, of tumbling over the side and grabbing the lanyard off the key.
is practically an impossibility.
Another puzzling thing is, if someone spent the evening drinking at a bar on shore, and you get into a dinghy without any onboard radio,
Or a portable radio, like most carry.
It seems really strange that anyone would secure that wrist strap.
Especially since they were so close to their yacht.
it was a 10-minute ride in the dinghy, at most.
In the pictures, the key has no wristband. It is just a straight piece of string hanging loose.
Right. You would have to grab it and pull it out with you as you are thrown overboard unexpectedly.
Doing that would be extremely difficult. Even though basic marine safety guidelines say it should be secured to your wrist.
If you are operating alone, that is exactly the idea.
To kill the engine.
But if you have a passenger, you do not want to pull that key out and leave them helpless to rescue you.
Well, who knows?
Right.
Then there is the other mystery. Brian claims she went over with the lanyard, the key, and her dry bag. What are the chances of that? If you are operating the boat, you are not typically wearing a dry bag.
Maybe she was, and I would have to examine it. But what are the chances of you grabbing a dry bag and clutching?
The lanyard, letting go of the throttle, and getting tossed overboard unexpectedly?
Especially when,
If you suddenly fall overboard, it happens so fast, you do not even have time to think. So it is almost impossible that someone would have the presence of mind to think, oh, I should grab that.
like trying to grab a few items on your way down.
Just a couple of items. Right. It occurs so instantly that when it happens, you do not even register what is going on. 1 second you are driving the vessel, and the next you are screaming for help.
Realizing you are suddenly in the water.
Exactly. It is difficult to comprehend.
I have seen a dry bag of a very similar shade, and he described one matching the green seat cushion.
I have actually seen a photograph of that dry bag inside the boat.
I cannot confirm it is the identical bag, but a highly similar dry bag was definitely in that dinghy.
Now that is a type of bag large enough to easily spot.
We are not talking about a tiny pouch you would bring to a water park.
It is not a small accessory. It is a substantial bag designed to remain buoyant.
While I do not have personal experience with dry bags, I know they are completely waterproof.
If it trapped a pocket of air inside, it would easily float on the surface.
At one stage during the search operations, once we recovered the green cushion, Brian told us to look out for the green dry bag too.
We searched that entire vicinity around the cushion, but we did not find any sign of it. Would you realistically expect to locate that dry bag if it had gone overboard?
It contained vital identification like passports and other critical items.
Why they would take passports to the shore is beyond me, but let us assume they did.
If you are in a dinghy with your passports, you would keep that bag tightly sealed.
It would be completely airtight and watertight.
Absolutely.
Wouldn't you expect that bag to eventually wash up somewhere along the shoreline?
Or at least spot a bright dry bag of that size.
Remember, we are talking about something roughly 18 inches long and 12 inches wide.
Surely you would spot it floating in those shallow coastal waters.
Well, if it actually floated, I would definitely expect it near where we recovered the cushion.
But if it sank, the underwater search area expands dramatically, making it incredibly difficult to locate submerged objects.
Even with a color that bright? Something in neon green?
Yes.
If it went down, I would say the chances of locating a sunken bag, even a vibrant one, are slim. So your next move is to depart the location where you attempted to pinpoint the incident.
The spot where Lynette fell overboard.
Right. Tell me, where did you head after that?
With police officers, fire rescue personnel, and Brian all on board your vessel, where did you head next?
So we steered west toward the shores of Great Abaco Island.
Specifically around Calcutta, where he claimed he drifted for a grueling 9 hours.
Understood.
I was monitoring the wind to test how realistic his story was, simply to narrow down our active search area.
Specifically, should we be searching around Lubber's quarters, which was much closer?
Or did he somehow clear it?
Could he have bypassed Lubber's quarters entirely and headed straight for Great Abaco Island?
Honestly, either scenario seems highly plausible to me.
To be precise, Great Abaco Island is where you will find Marsh Harbor.
Locals usually just call the entire area Marsh Harbor, but it is actually a much larger island.
In fact, we actually refer to that specific island as the mainland.
So, we headed back out with Mr. Hooker and the local police officers. We headed back to the general area where his dinghy was originally found, and turned south to carefully re-inspect that shoreline.
Then, suddenly,
a search and rescue colleague handed binoculars up to me on the deck. He said, "Jim, take a look at that green object over there.
Could it be afloat?" Looking through the lenses, it certainly appeared.
Like it could easily be one.
It was tough to make out the exact shape because of the immense distance. Likely a solid 100 yards away, with the shallow water making the shoreline extremely rough.
So yes, there was a very real possibility that was it. Now, even though I was not physically present for this next part, I believe Brian Hooker had a quiet conversation with the search and rescue team, agreeing that there was a strong chance that could indeed be the missing float.
Did Brian actually take the binoculars to check if it was his own float?
Personally, I never witnessed that happen. And let us be clear, the green float we are discussing is the very same one Brian claimed, both to his friends and to the investigators, that he threw toward her, never knowing if she actually managed to grab it, because he said she was bobbing between 2 to 3 foot waves. But were 2 to 3 foot swells really possible at 7:30? Or 7:45 at night, just 150 yards off Elbow Cay? To me, that sounds entirely plausible. I actually happened to be in that exact area, dining with my wife, daughter, and granddaughter. And right around that time, between 7:30 and 8 o'clock, I distinctly recall the exact timing because I arrived late. Pulling in just before 7:30 as darkness was falling fast. As we sat at our table, the wind suddenly surged, making it quite uncomfortable to be outside. Because of that, I knew the water was treacherous, the kind of night where absolutely nobody should be out boating on the Sea of Abaco. Now, was it 7:30 or closer to 8 o'clock when you first noticed things turning bad? Well, I can tell you that I sat down at the table, which was outdoors, just minutes before 7:30, and it was only moments later that the heavy winds started. Could it have been 7:45? Yes, but it easily could have been 8 o'clock instead. In any case, the darkness was settling in. Right. At 7:45, it was still manageable. Just twilight then. But by 8 o'clock, it was pitch black.
So the shift happens somewhere in between.
Yes, it was dark, and the conditions out there were turning treacherous. So you didn't really notice other boaters out there at that hour? Honestly, I wouldn't expect a single boat to be out that night. The water was rough enough to keep anyone from moving. Even so, some vessels would still be anchored.
Right, absolutely, yeah.
To clarify, when I say no one should be out, I mean actively moving. But for a sailboat or powerboat sitting at anchor, it wasn't dangerous weather, not for a vessel that was secured. You'd definitely want to remain on board to stay safe. But you certainly wouldn't want to be in that 8-foot dinghy the Hookers had around 7:30 or 8 that evening, just 150 yards offshore from Elbow Cay. For me, that would be a hard pass. That speaks volumes. I mean, you work in fire and rescue. Do you really think those natural products you buy come from wholesome family businesses? Not even close. Most get bought out by giant conglomerates and private equity firms, hijacking the brand and filling them with corporate junk. But one brand does things differently. The Van Man Company. They launched the grass-fed tallow movement years ago with skincare, and they've been dominating since, with formulations so pure you could almost eat them. Tallow works because its cellular structure matches our natural oils perfectly, meaning your skin recognizes it and drinks it up. It replaces your body lotion, your night creams, wrinkle creams, and even first aid ointments. It is strong enough to repair damaged skin, yet pure enough to eat on toast.
Just real ingredients. Ready to escape the corporate chemicals?
Go to vanman.shop/Banfield and use code BANFIELD to save 15% on your first purchase.
That is vanman.shop/Banfield. Use the code BANFIELD for 15% off your first order.
Or just check the description below and click that link.
Van Man. Real ingredients. No exceptions. You clearly understand local boating conditions. After all, you have lived here a long time.
That's true. Returning to the shoreline, did Brian ever identify that green cushion? Did he look up and say, "That is definitely it"?
Well, on that initial Sunday, he spotted it from a distance and thought it looked like the one.
But on Monday, I could not go search.
By Tuesday, my wife and I got out there.
We took our own boat,
Then drove over to the spot where we spotted the cushion, and sure enough, we located it.
When we showed it to him, Brian confirmed that was absolutely the one.
There was also a strange tear right where you would normally hold it.
Almost acting like a handle where it tore.
Now, in other photos of their dinghy, I noticed that flotation device with the torn handle. Because of that specific detail? Once we recovered it, I asked Mr. Hooker if he saw his wife grab onto it, but he said he did not see her reach for it.
Did he ever mention 2 to 3 foot waves?
I do not recall him mentioning 2 to 3 foot waves, maybe 1 to 2 foot seas.
And as for the rough seas, honestly, I can't say.
Yeah.
No mention of wave height, but everybody on board would have been talking about how rough the water was.
Did he ever mention, "I saw her, then she vanished, and I lost sight of her between the heavy waves"? The only detail he actually gave about what he saw was, he simply said, "I saw her swimming away." But he couldn't specify if she swam toward land or back to the yacht.
Well, when I talked with him on the bow of the boat early Sunday morning,
It was full daylight, and I specifically pointed out at the water, asking, "Is this where it happened?"
and he replied, "Yeah, it's confusing."
That's the spot. And then he described the final piling in the channel.
So I pointed to 3 different spots on the shoreline because it was incredibly close. It was obvious.
It seemed completely obvious to me that if she wasn't heading straight for the dinghy, she would have gone for the shore. I motioned toward 3 spots on the shore, and his response was basically along the lines of, "I just cannot say for sure. It's confusing." But he never said no. Not toward the shore. She was swimming back to the yacht. I definitely do not remember that. That's right. I don't recall that. Because either she is swimming west toward land or south back to the vessel, and he can't explain which.
Now, I'd say if she was heading to the shore, she was swimming southwest.
Okay. And if she was heading back to the boat, that would have been,
Let's say,
completely perpendicular to the beach, instead of angling directly toward the shoreline.
He couldn't articulate that.
As for the shore, his response was, "This is confusing. I just can't say. I just don't know." So, you had another chance to be with Brian after spending that entire day alongside him.
Tell me about the next time you crossed paths with Brian.
So, later in the day, it might have been noon or maybe 1 o'clock, I received a message saying Brian needed a ride from Marsh Harbor back to his boat.
And the word went out. Who is available?
Well, I was free, so I headed over to Conchin, where we first met the police. Since it was a Sunday, things were dead quiet, especially with that howling wind. There just wasn't much happening.
So I pulled in,
Tied the boat up, waited a few minutes, and the police arrived to drop him off. I walked with him along the outside fence line toward the main entrance on that Sunday.
and then we walked a fairly long way back to the car.
The very first thing he asked me was, "With your background, how often do you actually find these people alive?" And I explained to him that every case is different. To be honest, I hadn't worked many cases involving the search for a missing body. But you kept that to yourself to avoid upsetting him further. Exactly. Because obviously, no two investigations are ever the same.
So we boarded the vessel, and during that 15-minute boat ride back to his vessel, we realized we both shared roots in West Michigan.
It felt incredibly awkward. Making small talk with a man who likely lost his wife just 12 hours before.
His overall demeanor was like someone who,
And I might have mentioned this earlier,
was in deep shock, like they had just been run over. Hit by a truck. He was completely subdued and despondent.
devastated?
Well,
I was putting myself in his shoes. If I was in that nightmare with my own wife, I would be utterly inconsolable and unable to function. I would need people by my side,
just to keep you standing.
To keep me from breaking.
but that wasn't how he was acting at all. Still,
Everyone grieves differently, but I definitely noticed that detail. Did the two of you talk much during that boat ride over to his yacht, the Soulmate?
That was his home, where he lived on the water.
Not really. I tried to tread lightly, if you will.
Balancing a few polite, brief exchanges with mostly respectful silence, since I did not want to be overly chatty during such a horrific ordeal.
so it remained quiet, but I did ask.
You know, about his background, where he docked his boat in Michigan, and his history with sailing. At one point, he admitted that he did not even want to sail anymore, the unspoken truth being without his wife. He literally told me he was done with sailing,
Which is entirely understandable, given the circumstances.
completely natural. What happened once you reached the Soulmate to drop him off?
I secured my vessel alongside his for a minute while he climbed aboard.
I cannot recall exactly how we started talking again,
But he was very anxious to retrieve his dinghy from the beach.
but the rough weather made it impossible to get anywhere near it.
It was simply too dangerous.
So I asked about his dinghy back at Marsh Harbor, 4 miles away.
Right, across the Abaco Sea.
Yeah,
It was far too hazardous to recover it by sea.
because of that, we ended up exchanging phone numbers.
So I told him I would contact some people who might actually have the time and resources to help him out the next morning.
So you gave him contacts to help recover the missing dinghy.
Yeah? I think what actually happened is I took his contact info and forwarded it to a connection.
Yeah? But did he ever ask what was currently happening? Or how he could join the rescue mission and be a part of it?
Like, who was actually in charge?
Did he ask those things?
On that Sunday, I really do not remember him asking those kinds of questions.
We might have mentioned people searching in various spots, but there was never any real, in-depth conversation about it.
I probably mentioned that teams were looking in different areas.
But we never went into any detail. Did he ask for a way to contact the Coast Guard search and rescue team? Or anyone else trying to locate his missing wife?
Not on Sunday. Not that first day.
Look, Sunday is, like you mentioned, within 12 hours of the whole incident.
True, but he still never asked what was actually going on.
Like, what is happening with the search? Who do I contact about this?
I do not remember him asking me that. That is correct. Is that strange?
Well, look, I can only put myself in his shoes. And I know I would have been absolutely desperate to know.
Exactly how many boats were out there searching for her.
Like, okay, I am back on my main vessel. Who is coming to get me so I can go out there?
Maybe it is not fair for me to project my own reactions onto him.
But that is absolutely how I would have felt. You would want to know every detail of the rescue mission and be active in it.
Makes sense. Was there ever a moment during all that time you spent with Brian Hooker?
Right after his wife Lynette allegedly went overboard.
Where he actually showed some emotion, keeping in mind some guys are just stoic.
He is a United States Marine. Did you see anything at all that pointed to a man in deep emotional pain?
Yes, and it was actually a pretty extreme reaction.
After we left his vessel with the police officers, we headed back toward Marsh Harbor.
We had finished the search.
And spotted what we later found out was a green float.
We dropped him and the police off at the harbor.
So he could go with the officers for what I assume was a 4 to 5 hour interrogation. When they stepped off the rescue boat, and onto the dock. I saw him bend completely double, clutching his knees with a look of pure agony on his face, just hanging his head.
Just a silent, agonized cry written all over his face.
Right around that very moment, not right away, but shortly after, he stood up straight and stared up at the sky. I do not mean he was staring at the sky in some deep, spiritual way, but his eyes were skyward, and I caught what was clearly a silent sob of pure agony. Were there around 6 police officers on scene, along with fire and rescue workers in the immediate area? Yes. Was this fully visible? I always wonder, was it just an act? Did he want people to witness this, or was his back turned to them? If you had to guess,
Did he want them to witness his pain, or was he trying to hide from their sight?
how did it look? I do not want to speculate, but physically, the situation was that he had stepped up onto the dock. The police officers were standing mostly behind his left shoulder, while I was positioned off to his right shoulder. I just happened to be observing him, so I caught those details. I cannot be entirely certain, but it seemed like the police officers were looking away, and they likely did not catch any of it. But that is just my own personal memory of it. Could they have actually seen his face? Was Brian standing in a spot where those officers could easily see his face twisted in pain? Or was he trying to shield that pain from them? Were the officers standing behind him completely unable to see his expressions? They were behind him, and even if it was not real, they were still behind his back, making it highly unlikely that they would be able to catch his facial expressions. They only saw his outline from behind, but because of your position in front of him, you saw everything. My specific angle allowed me to see his face. And it felt like a deeply painful, genuine moment, so it felt entirely real to you back then. Did you notice anything else during that time that caught your attention, or did anything else strike you as being particularly unusual? Nothing else stands out. That Monday afternoon, Brian messaged me with some questions about organizing a search. I got the distinct impression he wanted me to join the search, but I simply was not in a position to do that.
So I advised him to reach out to the Conch Inn,
since it was right near where he had moved his boat. He actually kept his boat moored there. Both he and Lynette spent a lot of time there, and they routinely paid for a mooring spot at the Conch Inn. Right, and those folks have deep roots there. They are local Bahamians. They are well connected, so I believed that was the perfect starting point if he truly wanted to. Hire a 30-foot boat with a local captain to take him out searching. Any clue if he actually did? I never heard a single word about that. Did Brian ever mention what Lynette was wearing when she supposedly went overboard? Yes. That Sunday morning, there was intense discussion regarding the description of the person we were looking for. Specifically, they said she was wearing a black bikini, a black two-piece bathing suit. That was our target visual in the search. Was there any mention of a beach cover-up? Absolutely nothing was said about one. Just a black two-piece bathing suit, repeated constantly. There is one question everyone keeps asking, especially folks from out of town, who assume that because it is the Bahamas, sharks are everywhere. Are there actually many sharks in the area where Brian claims Lynette fell off the boat? To be honest, in the exact spot she went over, I have never spotted a single shark. And frankly, I really do not think sharks are drawn to swimmers out there, simply because humans do not look like prey to them. However, a lifeless body instead of an active swimmer. Well, that might look very different to a predator. As you get closer to the mainland, along the path that the dinghy would have taken, some local residents do warn that sharks migrate through those waters.
So there was theory that she could have been taken by one.
That is out in the middle of the Sea of Abaco, just past Lubber's Quarters. Is that the area, Yi? Just west of Lubber's Quarters. Meaning, if she drifted along the same path Brian navigated, she would have floated right past Lubber's Quarters into that specific zone, where sharks are known to migrate from area to area. their natural pathway.
But then again, serious shark attacks here are extremely rare, years apart. So they are not hovering around constantly.
It is technically possible, but highly unlikely. Right, exactly.
Jim, things have shifted dramatically since we spoke at the Hopetown Inn in Marina.
We have fresh details from video surveillance and timestamps that Lynette's daughter Carly, along with her boyfriend,
Steve, discovered. The footage shows Lynette and Brian leaving the Abaco Inn, walking to the dock around 6:38. That completely changes the timeline for you.
Yes, absolutely.
It changes everything, because the original story was about leaving after 7:30. I was willing to give them some leeway, assuming 7:30 meant 7:45, but by the time you hit 8, it is already pitch black.
But if they actually set off much earlier than that?
What I mean is, if the departure happened anytime between 6:45 and 7:30, then we are dealing with a completely different situation.
The original story had them leaving at dusk into the dark. But this new timestamp suggests they left in daylight heading into dusk. And that creates an entirely different equation. Honestly, parts of his stories simply do not hold up anymore. Think about it. Look at the route, steering that dinghy out of the White Sound Channel, away from the Abaco Inn, and taking a left, heading straight toward the Soulmate. That entire boat trip only takes about 10 to 15 minutes.
Now, if they actually left, and I have to be precise here because we still cannot confirm if
they ever left the inn. There is no surveillance footage showing them boarding the vessel. Perhaps they just decided to take a stroll. Maybe they lingered on the dock chatting, or spent some quiet moments sitting on the sand. But if they headed straight for the water, jumped in the dinghy, and immediately sped away,
That places them at the precise spot where he claims she fell overboard, at roughly 6:50.
even if we say 6:55, there is still enough bright sunlight to get a tan.
Yes, without a doubt.
Actually, I have a theory that does not rely so heavily on the timestamp from that surveillance camera. Any seasoned sailor who has spent years living on a boat, or anyone with real experience on the water,
Knows that you simply do not navigate a small, vulnerable dinghy after the sun goes down.
it is practically a rule of survival.
Every experienced mariner obsessively tracks the weather conditions.
They note the exact sunset and actively avoid traveling in the dark.
You do not take risks in a tiny boat. There is no logic to forcing it, especially since there was no moon.
In fact, the moon did not rise until 10 at night.
So, if he navigated the White Sound Channel at 6:50, remember that 6:50 in the evening means broad daylight. Just look at the bright sun behind you right now.
Exactly my point. This means there is absolutely no way you would lose sight of someone in the water because of darkness for nearly another hour.
Precisely. It is still broad daylight here.
Completely clear. Absolutely bright daylight, and it will stay that way for at least 45 minutes.
Honestly, that is being extremely generous with the timeline.
45 minutes.
That is plenty of breathing room, especially since the trip in that little 2 to 4 horsepower dinghy from the Abaco Inn to the anchored Soulmate takes 15 minutes at most.
To me, this presents a massive contradiction, an impossible scenario either way.
now,
Brian claimed his wife was the one steering the dinghy.
Right. But I know her daughter Carly insisted that he never allowed her to drive that boat. Yet, he likely did. Back when I was personally giving him a ride from Marsh Harbor to his boat, he boasted to me, with a clear sense of pride, stressing his absolute independence,
That his vessel, Soulmate, had not actually been tied up at a marina dock in over 2 entire years.
During that time, they were strictly anchored or tied to a mooring ball.
Now, if a boat is anchored or moored like that for 2 full years, Lynette inevitably would have mastered how to operate the vessel.
she might not have piloted it constantly, but she certainly would have been highly capable.
That is simply a basic reality of living on a sailboat for 2 years. So, let us rewind to that evening, somewhere around 6:30, 6:45, or 7 o'clock. Sure,
Normally, the men drive.
When a sailing couple goes out, the husband is usually operating the dinghy.
But if he hands the controls to his wife, it suggests the water was calm and it was bright daylight.
This is a good moment. A perfect opportunity for the wife to steer while the husband takes a break.
So, if she was steering, the conditions must have been completely calm.
I never even considered that, but you are absolutely right.
Look, I know my way around boats. If Chris and I were in a dinghy during rough weather,
I probably would have let him.
take the helm, because you need real physical strength to grip even a small outboard motor.
You simply have to be a bit stronger. Yes, that is exactly it.
So if darkness was falling or the wind was kicking up, which it likely was by then, he definitely would have taken over the driving.
99.9% of guys would say, "It is getting rough, I will take over."
And he claims waves were 2 to 4 feet, Jim. 2 to 4 feet.
In that water,
Which, honestly, neither of them should navigate in a tiny boat. But let us assume they got trapped in those rough waves after leaving the White Sound Channel.
I think you are absolutely right. There is no way the less experienced or weaker person would remain at the helm. The seasoned United States Marine would have stepped up and said, "Let me handle this. It is getting dangerous."
Get us out. Absolutely.
I would argue there is zero chance he would let anyone else steer in bad weather. Yet they claim she was driving, which strongly suggests the weather was perfectly calm. And then,
Yeah, that brings us to the core dilemma.
If conditions were peaceful when she fell over, he would have easily seen her.
There was no pitch darkness, no towering waves, and no excuse for losing sight of her.
None of those convenient excuses actually work.
if she was the one driving the boat,
He could see her, and unless you panic, you immediately toss the anchor.
that anchor sits right on the deck, constantly getting in the way. You cannot just claim it was hidden away or that you forgot all about it, or that you did not see it. The anchor is right there underfoot, impossible to ignore.
In plain daylight, you are literally stepping over it the entire time. It is a massive anchor, about, this big.
It is heavy, and it is in the way. In daylight, sober and clear-headed, anyone would do the exact same thing.
Drop the anchor.
You might be annoyed or even frustrated,
Thinking, great, now we have to deal with this minor hassle in calm weather.
If she was staring in calm conditions, this should have been a minor hiccup.
Drop the anchor.
She swims toward the boat. Let's look at another part of his story that has shifted since.
We uncovered new details in our last interview.
Since we last spoke with you,
We realized the final photo of Lynette alive shows her wearing a light green swimsuit cover-up.
We didn't know that back then. What exactly did Brian say when you asked him very specifically?
As a search and rescue team member, what was your wife wearing when you last saw her?
Right. Early on Sunday morning, right in the
Area of 6:30 or 7 a.m., right where he claimed the whole incident took place. The rest of us on the dock kept repeating the details we were given.
What was she wearing?
And his answer was a two-piece black swimsuit.
I am 100% certain of that. Mostly because when he said it, honestly,
Shame on me.
when he said those words, I thought, that is strange. Young women under 30 do not usually walk around a place like the Abaco Inn without some cover-up. So that struck me as strange.
But obviously, I was not thinking about an active investigation.
I was relying on experience. Just what exactly are we tracking?
He told us a two-piece black swimsuit, so that is what we sought.
did he repeat that? Did he say it multiple times?
I mean, people must have asked him repeatedly, what was the last thing you saw her wearing?
What was she wearing? Yet he never mentioned anything but that two-piece black swimsuit. That is correct.
The one thing I can personally swear to is hearing him say it on the search boat deck. Now, as a searcher, I heard it repeated often, but I heard him say it directly once.
What does that mean, hearing it as a searcher? Can you explain that to me?
Out there,
Searchers were constantly asking each other, what are we scanning for?
We got a text alert saying, "Woman overboard, black swimsuit." Things like that.
But absolutely no green cover-up, never once mentioned from start to finish.
So he never mentioned to you that she had on a green cover-up? And he did not tell anyone else on the official record.
She wore a green cover-up, which could have spread among the searchers and helped find her.
If he did tell someone else, that detail never reached the rest of us.
Yeah, and it definitely would have, right? It absolutely would have.
Had he mentioned it to anyone on the search crew or the police, you guys would know.
Exactly, and on that particular morning, it was an incredibly critical situation. Perhaps the one saving grace was that since he claimed the missing float was bright green,
Our eyes were tuned to green. So if we spotted a green cover-up, we would have locked onto it immediately, mistaking it for the float.
So I do not believe we truly missed a chance to search effectively.
But, yet on Sunday morning, he didn't mention a cover-up at all.
she was wearing only a black two-piece swimsuit.
Then,
I want to press a bit deeper than we did before. Specifically, his claim to you that he wasn't drunk at all. How would you describe the conversation regarding,
his total confusion about where she fell in and his failure to pinpoint the location?
Did alcohol come up in that discussion? What did he tell you?
We never actually discussed drinking.
But he was definitely lost, unable to piece together what occurred, just like you described.
I figured he was heavily drunk. He acted exactly like someone who had too much to drink.
But later, I learned they supposedly only shared 2 drinks over the course of the entire evening.
And then Ken, the bartender, told us that he wouldn't call him drunk, maybe just slightly tipsy at the absolute most.
Which makes me think that really caught you off guard.
It suggests to me that
he was clear-headed and functional. Anyone on that boat should have been able to act quickly.
take this.
You mentioned a crucial detail earlier. There were 2 life vests right there in the vessel.
Right, sitting in the bottom of the dinghy.
Stowed in the dinghy, he absolutely knew they were there.
Both of them knew those life jackets were on board, whether the weather was calm or rough.
But in clear conditions, when emergency struck, he threw a flat green cushion that would have just drifted away like paper.
But there is a heavy life vest right there. You grab it, fling it like a discus.
And it flies with enough weight and force to actually reach her.
Let me offer a different scenario.
If the vest feels too light, and throwing it is like tossing a sail into the wind,
Put it on, clutch the second one, dive in, and swim straight to her. Forget the boat.
Now you are both safe, and getting back to land is easy.
Or strap on your vest.
Take the other vest, seize the end of the anchor line to keep the boat tied close to you since the anchor is still aboard, and dive over the side. But none of that happened. Personally, I would look for the bowline.
I would grab the rope used to tie up to the dock, secure it to my ankle, and swim straight out to her.
yes.
My plan differs slightly, but your logic is sound. If the green cushion is right there, you toss it first. But you would instantly watch it drift away, completely useless in the wind.
So you grab the heavy vest, hurl it like a frisbee, and secure some real distance.
If that fails, throw the remaining life vest.
Or grab the last jacket and throw yourself over the side.
Just dive in. You are only 150 yards from the shoreline.
You are a U.S. Marine. You can handle this. Forget about the boat.
You do not just end up drifting in the open sea and both drown.
You go get her.
Drag her to land, then wait until morning to wave someone down and say, "Help us find our boat."
It is likely near Lovers.
Exactly. She was at the wheel, meaning visibility had to be clear enough for them to spot each other.
In the worst case,
You grab the last life vest and jump in because she is only 10 feet away.
It makes no sense to me either. But I am glad we could sit down for this second follow-up conversation. Honestly, I held back that first recording because you did not have all the facts yet.
I did not either. But what we learned later completely changed how you view this tragedy.
Is there anything else you want to share, Jim?
Yes, though we pretty much went over it all. Unless you are dealing with pitch darkness and absolute panic,
There was not enough alcohol to cause that level of confusion, in my opinion.
The first instinct for anyone on that vessel is to drop the anchor.
It is so basic, literally anyone would do it.
And second, unless you lose sight of the boat in a frenzy.
Nobody is going to swim away from the boat.
if she had boating experience, it is highly unlikely she would swim away from it. In complete darkness and pure terror.
And with his voice failing, sure, anything could have happened.
But with her navigating and him sober, I doubt it was that blindingly dark.
Night scenario I originally pictured in my mind.
Exactly. It is like when the search first got underway.
We followed the most logical path, which seemed completely reasonable then. A woman goes overboard. What clues tell us where she might have drifted? And we search those spots.
Complex theories just did not add up back then.
Now that time has passed, we have shifted our view on what is truly hard to believe.
To believe the official story, you have to ignore so many details that simply do not fit. And that original simple explanation is actually the one that makes the least sense. Jim, thank you.
I cannot tell you how much this means to me and our audience, but especially to the Coast Guard investigators tracking every single one of these discrepancies.
Well, hopefully all of this leads to real answers. It was incredibly moving to see that footage of Carly. And to witness her pain. She lost her mother.
No matter what happened, she lost her mother, and those could easily be my own daughters.
And the local community.
They genuinely feel a deep connection to Lynette now.
She could easily have been our sister, she could have been our mother, our daughter, or our wife.
And there is so much love and support heading toward Lynette and her family.
They deserve real justice. Thank you for this, Jim.
Of course.
I want you to see what happened this Saturday.
April 18th marks the 2-week point since Lynette was last seen alive at the Abaco Inn.
These women who gathered here didn't even know Lynette personally.
They simply felt she deserved a floral tribute out on the Sea of Abaco.
They held a quiet, intimate service. They shared the video with me.
And they generously allowed me to forward the footage to Lynette's daughter, Carly, and her mother, Darlene.
But they didn't want any publicity for the service they held.
They spoke a few words and basically said that they didn't know Lynette, but felt she deserved to be remembered.
They donated all the flowers and even provided the boat.
A couple of the women on board spoke a few heartfelt words and released the flowers into the Sea of Abaco to honor Lynette.
Honestly, I can't think of a more beautiful or fitting gesture.
It says so much about the people of El Bouquet. They are genuinely some of the kindest souls you'll ever meet.